From the scholar's stone that Ki-woo receives, to the ancient staircase imagery that dominates every scene. From the rain symbolism to the food warfare, what symbols based on authentic Korean mystical traditions and occult practices are really explained in Parasite? These hidden secrets will completely change how you see not just this film, but how ancient Asian wisdom traditions have been hiding their most powerful teachings in modern cinema. Bong Joon-ho didn't just make a class warfare thriller. He created a comprehensive guide to Korean shamanism, geomancy, and spiritual hierarchy in a masterful way. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this movie resonated across every culture on Earth, why the scholar's stone represents one of the most dangerous forms of prosperity magic, and why the smell that haunts the poor characters is actually a spiritual curse that can never be washed away. But before we dive into the deepest secrets, let me ask you something. Did you notice that the scholar's stone floats in water at the end, revealing it was hollow all along? That's not just clever symbolism, that's exposing the fundamental lie behind all prosperity magic and get-rich-quick spiritual practices. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and keep up with the channel for new videos every week breaking down these hidden secrets. The first secret alone will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about luck, money, and spiritual power. Secret number 1, the hollow scholar's stone prosperity curse. When Kai-woo's friend Min gives the family that beautiful scholar's stone, claiming it will bring them wealth and good fortune, most viewers see it as a nice cultural detail. But if you understand Korean mystical traditions, you'll recognize that he's actually cursing them with one of the most dangerous forms of prosperity magic ever practiced. Scholar's stones, called suseok in Korean, have been used for over 1,000 years in Confucian and Taoist practices. These naturally formed rocks were believed to contain concentrated spiritual energy that could influence fate, fortune, and social status. Wealthy scholars would spend fortunes acquiring the perfect stones to enhance their wisdom and attract prosperity. But here's what's incredible. The movie reveals the dark truth about prosperity magic that most people never understand. When Kai-woo's basement floods at the end, and he finds the stone floating in the sewage water, we discover it was hollow all along. This isn't just symbolic, it's showing us that all prosperity magic is fundamentally empty. In authentic Korean shamanic tradition, objects that promise easy wealth are considered hungry ghosts, spiritual parasites that appear to offer help but actually drain the life force of everyone who touches them. The scholar's stone doesn't bring the Kim family good fortune. It brings them into contact with the Park family, which ultimately destroys their lives. The most disturbing detail is that the stone becomes a weapon in the climax. Kai-woo gets his skull cracked by the very object that was supposed to bring him prosperity. This matches shamanic warnings about prosperity magic. The spiritual forces that promise easy wealth always demand payment in blood, suffering, or spiritual corruption. But the stone's hollow nature reveals something even deeper. It represents the emptiness at the heart of all class-based aspirations. The Kim family's desire to rise up is literally hollow, just like the stone that symbolizes their dreams. And this hollowness connects to a spiritual curse that marks the poor in ways that go far beyond just economic status. Secret number 2, the inescapable smell. When Mr. Park repeatedly mentions the distinctive smell that Ki-tak and his family carry, describing it as the scent of people who ride the subway, he's not just being classist. He's identifying what Korean shamanic tradition calls spiritual markers that reveal a person's true spiritual and social status. In traditional Korean mysticism, different classes of people were believed to carry distinct spiritual signatures that could be perceived by those with refined senses. These weren't just physical odors. They were energetic emanations that revealed a person's karma, their ancestral burdens, and their spiritual development. The subway smell that Mr. Park finds so offensive represents what shamans call the scent of struggle, the spiritual residue that accumulates when people are forced to live in survival mode. It's not something that can be washed off because it's not physical dirt. It's the energetic imprint of poverty, stress, and spiritual exhaustion. But here's what's really incredible. The movie shows that this smell is literally inescapable. No matter how well the Kim family dresses, how perfectly they perform their roles, or how much they try to fit in, the Parks can always detect their true class status through this spiritual marker. This matches Korean shamanic teachings about Han, the accumulated spiritual burden that gets passed down through generations of oppression and hardship. Han isn't just emotional trauma, it's believed to create actual changes in a person's energy field that can be perceived by others. The most disturbing detail is that the smell becomes stronger when Ki-taek is under stress, suggesting that emotional states can amplify these spiritual markers. When he's forced to drive Mr. Park while his daughter is bleeding to death, the smell becomes so intense that Mr. Park has to cover his nose, revealing his complete lack of empathy for human suffering. And this spiritual hierarchy that the smell represents is built into the very architecture of Korean society through principles that most people have never heard of. Secret number 3, the staircases. The obsessive focus on staircases throughout Parasite isn't just visual metaphor, It's depicting the ancient Korean geomancy system called pungsu, feng shui, that uses elevation and spatial relationships to maintain rigid social hierarchies. In traditional Korean architecture and city planning, elevation was never accidental. Higher ground was reserved for nobility and spiritual authority, while lower areas housed servants, merchants, and the poor. This wasn't just practical. It was believed that spiritual energy flows downward, so those at higher elevations naturally accumulated more power and good fortune. The movie shows this principle operating in modern Seoul. The Park family lives high on a hill in a house designed by a famous architect, while the Kim family lives in a semi-basement that floods whenever it rains. But it goes deeper than just geography. Every interior space in the film uses stairs to show power relationships. Mr. Park's obsession with employees not crossing the line connects directly to Confucian social hierarchy principles that were enforced for over 500 years in Korea. These weren't just social customs, they were considered cosmic laws that maintained the balance between heaven and earth. But here's what's really incredible. The movie shows how these ancient hierarchy systems have been encoded into modern architecture and social relationships. The Park's house has multiple levels that the Kim family must navigate, always moving up to serve and down to hide their true activities. The most profound detail is that Ki-taek's final act of violence occurs when he crosses the ultimate line, killing his social superior. In traditional Korean cosmology, this type of transgression doesn't just break social rules, it tears holes in the fabric of reality itself, which is why Ki-taek must disappear into the underworld basement afterward, and that basement connects to traumas that go back to the most devastating period in Korean history. Secret number 4, Korean War bunker survivors. When we discover the former housekeeper's husband living in the secret bunker beneath the Park house, most viewers see it as a plot twist. But if you understand Korean history, you'll recognize that he represents the millions of people who are still psychologically trapped in the Korean War trauma that never officially ended. The Korean War happened between 1950 and 1953, and it created a generation of people who lived in underground bunkers, caves, and hidden spaces to survive constant bombing and violence. Many of these survivors developed what psychologists now recognize as complex PTSD, but Korean culture had no framework for understanding or treating this trauma. The man in the bunker, who's been hiding from debt collectors for 4 years, represents the Korean concept of Jeongshinbyung, spiritual illness caused by unresolved historical trauma. His obsessive devotion to Mr. Park, whom he's never met, mirrors how trauma survivors often develop parasitic relationships with authority figures who represent safety and stability. But here's what's really incredible. His use of Morse code to communicate with the outside world connects to actual Korean War survival techniques. Resistance fighters and civilians, trapped in bunkers, developed elaborate communication systems using light signals, tapping codes, and other methods to coordinate survival efforts. The most disturbing detail is that he's been performing a daily ritual of turning lights on and off to honor Mr. Park's evening routine. This represents what shamans call ancestor worship displacement, when trauma survivors transfer their need to honor the dead onto living authority figures. His wife's death from the head injury she receives while trying to protect him shows how Korean War trauma continues to claim victims decades after the fighting stopped. The violence that erupts at the birthday party is really the Korean War trauma finally surfacing after being buried for generations. And this buried trauma gets triggered by natural forces that affect different classes in completely opposite ways. Secret number 5, the rain blessing. That crucial scene where the same rainstorm is a blessing for the wealthy Park family, but a catastrophic flood for the poor Kim family, isn't just social commentary. It's depicting authentic Korean weather magic principles that have been used for centuries to maintain class divisions. In traditional Korean spirituality, weather events were never considered random. Rain, wind, and storms were believed to be manifestations of spiritual forces that could be influenced through ritual practices, and that affected different people based on their spiritual status and karmic debts. The Parks experienced the rain as a blessing because their elevated position, both literally and spiritually, allows them to receive the positive aspects of the storm: clean air, canceled camping plans that bring the family together, and the aesthetic pleasure of watching rain from safety. This matches Korean geomancy principles about how spiritual energy flows. But the Kim family experiences the same rain as a curse because their low spiritual and physical position makes them vulnerable to the destructive aspects of the same forces. Their semi-basement floods with sewage, their belongings are destroyed, and they're forced to sleep in a gymnasium with other displaced poor people. Here's what's really incredible. Korean shamanic tradition teaches that weather magic can be used as a form of spiritual warfare between different classes. Wealthy families would hire shamans to perform rituals that would direct beneficial weather toward their properties while deflecting harmful weather toward their enemies or social inferiors. The most profound detail is that Mrs. Park calls the rain a blessing while talking on the phone. completely unaware that the same storm is destroying the lives of the people who serve her. This represents what shamans call spiritual blindness, the inability of those with privilege to perceive how their good fortune is connected to others' suffering. And this spiritual blindness extends to how food is used as a weapon in Korean cultural warfare. Secret number 6. Korean food warfare traditions. The food symbolism throughout Parasite, from the noodles to the birthday cake to the peach allergy attack, isn't just cultural detail. It's depicting authentic Korean food warfare traditions that use cuisine to establish dominance, create spiritual bonds, and even poison enemies. In Korean culture, food has always been a primary way of establishing and maintaining social hierarchies. The type of food you eat, how it's prepared, and who serves it to you all communicate complex messages about status, respect, and power relationships. Mrs. Park's request for ramdon, a combination of cheap instant noodles with expensive sirloin steak, perfectly represents how the wealthy appropriate and corrupt working class culture. She's taking a poor person's comfort food and elevating it with luxury ingredients, which is exactly how cultural colonization works. But the most sophisticated food warfare happens with the peach allergy attack on the former housekeeper. In traditional Korean medicine, allergies were understood as spiritual incompatibilities. When someone's energy field rejects certain substances, it reveals deeper karmic conflicts. The Kim family's use of peach fuzz to trigger the housekeeper's allergic reaction represents what Korean folk medicine calls invisible poisoning, using someone's own spiritual weaknesses against them. They're not just making her sick, they're exploiting her body's natural defenses to remove her from the household. Also, the birthday cake that becomes the center of the final violent confrontation represents the Korean concept of jong, the emotional bonds that are created through sharing food. When the cake is destroyed by violence, it symbolizes the complete breakdown of all social bonds and the return to primitive survival instincts. The most disturbing detail is that throughout the movie, we see the Kim family eating the park's leftover food, which in Korean shamanic tradition creates a spiritual debt that must eventually be repaid. Their final violent outburst represents this debt being collected in blood, and this violence follows patterns that appear in ancient Greek religious traditions. Secret number 7. The Dionysian Birthday Massacre. The chaotic violence that erupts during Dasong's birthday party isn't random mayhem. It's following the exact pattern of ancient Dionysian festivals, where civilized social order would temporarily collapse into primal violence and ecstasy. In Greek mythology, Dionysus was the god of wine, madness, and the breakdown of social boundaries. His festivals involved ritual intoxication, sexual license, and sometimes violent sacrifice that was believed to purify the community by releasing accumulated tensions. The birthday party represents a modern Dionysian festival. There's alcohol, there's celebration of a young god, Daesong, and there's the presence of hidden tensions that have been building throughout the film. When the violence erupts, it follows the classic Dionysian pattern of sudden explosive release. But here's what's really incredible. The violence specifically targets the women first. Ki-jung gets stabbed, then the former housekeeper dies from her head injury. In Dionysian rituals, women were often the primary victims because they were believed to be more susceptible to divine madness and spiritual possession. The most profound detail is that the violence occurs while Dasong is dressed as a Native American warrior, representing the primitive, pre-civilized state that Dionysian festivals were meant to temporarily restore. The costume isn't just racist stereotyping, it's showing how the wealthy family romanticizes violence while remaining protected from its real consequences. Mr. Park's reaction to the chaos, his primary concern being the smell of Ki-taek rather than the death and injury around him, shows how the wealthy maintain their psychological distance even during moments of extreme crisis. He's literally more disturbed by the scent of poverty than by actual human suffering, and Ki-taek's response to this callousness represents a complete spiritual transformation that goes far beyond just anger. Secret number 8. Shamanic Possession Transformation. When Ki-taek finally snaps and kills Mr. Park, he's not just committing murder, he's undergoing what Korean shamanic tradition calls sinbayong, a form of spiritual possession where accumulated trauma and rage transform someone into a vessel for ancestral vengeance. Throughout the movie, Ki-taek has been the most passive member of his family, always following others' plans and avoiding confrontation. But Korean shamanic tradition teaches that this type of suppressed energy doesn't disappear. It accumulates until it reaches a breaking point where the person becomes possessed by spiritual forces beyond their control. The moment when Ki-taek stabs Mr. Park represents what shamans call hanpuli, the explosive release of generational trauma and rage that has been building for decades or even centuries. He's not just acting as an individual, he's become a channel for all the poor people who have been humiliated and dehumanized by the wealthy class. But here's what's really incredible. After the killing, Ki-taek immediately disappears into the basement bunker, taking the place of the previous trauma victim. This represents the shamanic concept of spiritual succession, when one person's role as a vessel for collective trauma is passed to another. His transformation from passive father to underground ghost shows that he's crossed from the world of the living into the realm of ancestral spirits. In Korean tradition, people who die from injustice or extreme emotion become wonhon, restless spirits who can influence the living world but can never find peace. The most profound detail is that Ki-taek's possession occurs at the exact moment when Mr. Park shows his true nature, caring more about the smell of poverty than about human life. This represents what shamans call a spiritual trigger, when accumulated trauma is activated by a specific moment of dehumanization that breaks the victim's connection to their ordinary identity. The Morse code messages he sends from the basement aren't just communication, they're the repetitive, ritualistic behavior that Korean shamans associate with spirit possession. He's no longer fully human, but he's not fully dead either. He exists in the liminal space between worlds that trauma creates. And his son's response to this transformation reveals the most dangerous lie that keeps people trapped in cycles of poverty and suffering. Secret number 9, the social mobility myth fantasy. That beautiful ending sequence where Kai-woo imagines becoming successful enough to buy the Park house and reunite with his father isn't hopeful. It's exposing the most destructive lie in modern capitalism, the myth that individual effort can overcome systemic inequality. When Ki-woo calculates that it would take him 564 years to earn enough money to buy the house, the movie is revealing the mathematical impossibility of social mobility under current economic conditions. But the deeper spiritual truth is even more disturbing. The fantasy itself is what keeps people trapped in systems that exploit them. In Korean Buddhist tradition, this type of impossible aspiration is called mangsang, delusional thinking that prevents people from accepting reality and finding genuine peace. Ki-woo's plan to work hard and make money represents the spiritual delusion that individual action can solve collective problems. But here's what's really incredible: the fantasy sequence is filmed with the same golden, warm lighting that the movie uses for the Park family's privileged moments. This shows that Ki-woo has internalized the wealthy family's aesthetic and values, even though achieving their lifestyle is mathematically impossible for him. The most profound detail is that his fantasy involves buying the exact same house where his sister died and his father became a ghost. He's not imagining creating something new. He's dreaming of possessing the same space that destroyed his family. This represents what psychologists call trauma bonding with the system that oppresses you. Korean shamanic tradition teaches that this type of impossible aspiration creates spiritual debt. The person becomes so focused on an unattainable future that they lose connection with present reality and their actual relationships. Ki-woo's fantasy prevents him from grieving his sister's death or accepting his father's transformation. And this entire tragic cycle is built into the fundamental structure of Korean storytelling and spatial design. Secret number 10, Korean geomancy pansori structure. The film's structure and the design of the houses aren't just clever filmmaking, they're based on ancient Korean geomancy principles and traditional pansori storytelling that encode spiritual teachings about fate, karma, and social harmony. Pansori is a traditional Korean musical storytelling form that uses specific narrative patterns to explore themes of social injustice, family loyalty, and spiritual transformation. Parasite follows the classic pansori structure: introduction of characters and their desires, escalating complications, explosive climax, and tragic resolution that reveals deeper truths about society. But the spatial design goes even deeper. The houses are arranged according to Pongsujiri, Korean feng shui principles that use elevation, water flow, and architectural elements to channel spiritual energy. The Park house sits at the top of a hill with perfect drainage, while the Kim house is in a depression that collects water and negative energy. The semi-basement design of the Kim house represents what geomancy calls a spiritual trap, a space that's neither fully above ground, conscious, nor fully below ground, unconscious, creating a liminal state that prevents spiritual development. The family is literally stuck between worlds. Here's what's really incredible: the flooding that destroys the Kim house follows traditional Korean beliefs about how spiritual imbalances manifest as natural disasters. When social harmony is disrupted by excessive inequality, the natural world responds with floods, storms, and other catastrophes that restore balance through destruction. The most profound detail is that both houses are built around staircases that connect different levels, but the Park house stairs lead upward to bedrooms and private spaces, while the Kim house stairs lead downward to the toilet. This represents the fundamental difference between spaces designed for spiritual ascension versus spiritual degradation. The bunker beneath the Park house represents what geomancy calls the shadow foundation, the hidden suffering that supports all apparent prosperity. Every wealthy household is built on invisible labor and hidden trauma that must be kept underground to maintain the illusion of clean success. Now I know what you're thinking. This is just a movie about class inequality, not some ancient mystical teaching. But here's the thing: the most powerful spiritual truths have always been hidden in stories, art, and cultural traditions. Korean cinema has become a vehicle for preserving and transmitting wisdom that goes back thousands of years. What makes Parasite so incredible is that it's not just using Korean cultural symbols for atmosphere, it's actually demonstrating how ancient spiritual principles operate in modern capitalist society. The smell markers, the geomancy, the food warfare, the shamanic possession, all of these are real forces that shape our world in ways most people never recognize. But the film also shows us that these systems are ultimately unstable. When the spiritual imbalances become too extreme, they create explosive corrections that destroy everyone involved, rich and poor alike. The violence at the birthday party represents what happens when ancient spiritual laws are violated for too long. We're so conditioned to believe that poverty is a personal failing and wealth is a personal achievement that we miss the fact that these are spiritual conditions created by collective systems. When you're constantly in survival mode, constantly stressed about basic needs, constantly treated as less than human, it changes something fundamental about your presence in the world. The film's global success proves that these spiritual truths transcend cultural boundaries. People from every continent recognized something authentic in the movie's portrayal of inequality, hierarchy, and the spiritual costs of extreme wealth disparity. And the fact that it won the Academy Award for Best Picture, the first non-English language film to do so, suggests that audiences are hungry for stories that address these deeper spiritual and social realities even when they're disguised as entertainment. But I want to know what you think. Did you catch any of these Korean mystical symbols when you first watched the movie? Have you experienced the kind of smell discrimination that the film depicts? Or noticed how certain spaces seem designed to make you feel spiritually elevated or degraded? Drop a comment below and let me know which of these secrets shocked you the most. And if you've had any experiences with the practices I mentioned, geomancy, shamanic healing, or traditional Korean culture, I'd love to hear how this analysis connects to your own understanding. If this video opened your mind to new possibilities about spirituality, social justice, and the hidden meanings in international cinema, then you need to subscribe to Occult Cinema right now. I'm constantly discovering movies and shows from around the world that are packed with authentic esoteric knowledge and practical spiritual techniques, and I break down exactly what they're teaching and why it matters. But before you go, let me leave you with one final thought that will change everything. The title Parasite doesn't just refer to the poor family leeching off the rich family, it refers to the entire system of inequality that parasitically feeds off human suffering to maintain artificial hierarchies. We're all living in the same spiritual system that the movie depicts, where some people's comfort requires other people's misery, where ancient wisdom about harmony and balance has been corrupted into systems of domination and control. The question isn't whether these spiritual forces are real, the question is whether we have the courage to recognize them in our own lives and communities, and the wisdom to create new forms of social organization that honor the spiritual equality of all human beings. Because in the end, we're all connected by the same spiritual laws that govern the universe. What affects one of us affects all of us. The only question is, will we keep participating in systems that create spiritual parasites, or will we learn to build communities based on genuine mutual aid and spiritual reciprocity? The choice is ours, but we don't have much time left to make it.